was John Tancock. He's a church leader from South Wales. Years of experience in the things that we're talking about now. And what I want to begin with, John, if I may, John, what I'd like to start with is where we left. I made sure that Mike didn't let out too many cats out the bag, but right. Here is Mike, a Mormon, Mike and Anne, of course, his wife, Mormons that begin to have doubts, begin to have questions, as he said to us, right. And wanting to know something more, and whose name should pop into his head but yours.
Right, okay.
No, I don't quite know why. But can you share a little bit what happened, how those things developed, and how you helped John with that?
Yeah, it was interesting. The first time I ever met Mike, I was called into a situation where a teenage girl, and I was only in my very early 20s, 21 perhaps, where a teenage girl in a local church youth group was thinking of joining the Mormons. She'd met 2 Mormon missionaries, the guys, handsome Americans with suits usually, and she'd been having meetings with them. 1 or 2 of the leaders of the church had gone over, and then they decided to bring me in because they knew that I was interested in...
Bit of heavy.
Yeah. But anyway, the Mormons responded quite rightly by saying, well, if you can bring one of yours, can we bring one of our experts, which is what they did. And the next meeting, who should stroll in through the door, a very smart-looking gentleman known as Mike Thomas.
Right.
And we effectively wrestled over the soul of this girl, basically. Now, she didn't join the Mormons, but Mike, I went over to see Mike, his wife and his children were very young at the time, and we got on well. But I'll tell you this, Mike was the most capable Mormon that I ever met.
Really?
I'd met Joseph Smith's great whatever. Grandson. I talked to a number of Mormon leaders, missionaries, and Mike was the most capable, the most intelligent, and the most able. And we had a few meetings, and then years later, that ended. Years later, it was just, I suppose you could call it a divine appointment. There were 2. And I met him once when he was involved selling encyclopedias. And he was a very good encyclopedia salesman as well, may I say.
I can imagine that.
And we had a long chat. And then I came out of my office one day, and there he was. And I just this was like years later now, and I said, good to meet you, Mike, and we chatted, shook hands, and even though we didn't share any perspective at all, I think there was a sense of respect between us. So I didn't think anymore, and I went home. But that night, Mike had put a note under the door. We'd gone out. I'd put a note under the door simply to say, John, we need to talk. And so that's when the roller coaster started.
Right. So, you go along there, and what was your aim at what you were looking to do? What did you think at this point? You know, we need to talk. Okay. Is a bit cryptic. I mean, what was your aim? What things were going through your head at this point?
Well, my aim was to be the Christian knight that would ride in.
That's a K-N-I-G-H-T.
Yeah. would ride in with my big Bible, my clever words, the power of God, and convert this man on the spot. God had other ideas and ambushed me.
Right.
Because when I pulled up outside the house, to be honest, all I really wanted to do was to listen to them and see if I could help at all. I detected, I felt inside myself something big was happening. I pulled up outside the door. I got out of the car, opened the rear door, reached down to get my first-class Apologetics anti-cult Bible, big, fat, with lots of notes. I reached down to get it, and it was almost like a voice from heaven said, leave it there. Honestly.
Yeah.
And for me, that was unheard of. That just wasn't the way.
Everywhere.
I was the big Bible man.
Yeah.
Right? So I knocked the door, and I just stood there with nothing in my hand, which was quite disturbing because I'm so used to going with the Bible or whatever. And I don't know if Mike said last week, but later on, and for me, okay, I knew that God had told me that, but some years later, when I heard Mike giving his testimony, he said that John turned up at the door without his Bible, and we were so relieved. So I would say, for me, it was a case of, all right, I had the connection with Mike, but just listening to God rather than just doing what I would do.
Yeah.
And we sat and we talked.
So you just sat and chatted, basically.
I listened.
Yeah, because I think from what Mike told us last week, they were having problems spiritually, and in other words, they weren't satisfied with their spiritual life. That was the key issue.
The phrase that they kept using was, "It's not working."
Right.
Because Mormonism is a very...
you used that last week.
It's very dynamic,
yes.
It's very smooth, it's organised, and it's supposed to work. But Mike had been in the system for a long time, and for longer, and they were saying, it is not working.
Right.
And it was for me, I didn't feel, when I was talking to them in those early stages, that somehow my agenda, my program, if you like, in my head was the thing that I needed to do. I just needed to put my sail up.
Right.
And it was like as if there was a dynamic at work which was nothing to do with me. I just happened to be the man on the spot, you know. And we talked, and for them, the phrase I used with them was, "Come and see."
Right.
Because all my life, when I'm talking to people in the Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, I had up until that time used the scriptures, my knowledge of their beliefs, plus argumentation which I felt would unlock things in these people. Yeah. But with Mike and Anne, it was a bit different, because I felt I needed to show them what the gospel had produced.
So what you were really sharing with them wasn't at that point as much as what was wrong with Mormonism, because they had a sense that it wasn't working, whatever they understood by that. But really, what you felt was right with Christ. In other words, you weren't trying to introduce them to another church or another religion. What you were trying to share the reality of a relationship. Is that true?
It is definitely that. And they'd already started on this, but I wanted to show them that in people's lives it works, or more correctly, he works.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so they came along to the church that we were a part of, and I remember it to this day. Mike and Anne sat somewhere in the middle in the crowd, and we just worshipped God. There was no special slant on the meeting because we have Mormons with us. We just worshipped God, and there was some teaching. During the worship, Mike and Anne were both standing up on their own, embracing each other, crying their eyes out. Absolutely crying their eyes out. And I remember Anne saying that we found it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Mike said last week that she actually had to go out because it was just too much for her.
Yes.
You know, just the sense of God's presence.
That's right.
At that point was just too much for her. And so in many ways, would you say, we're going to go on and talk a little bit more detail in various things in a moment, but would you say that's a good place to start with most people? In other words, so many people want to deal with what's wrong with the group that they are talking to. Would you say that to have this positive attitude of sharing what's right with a true relationship with Jesus is a great thing to do anyway, whatever the situation?
Absolutely, definitely, positively. There has to come a time when anybody involved in a religious group like the Mormons has to face up to the failings, faults, and, to be honest, the misleading things that they've learned for many, many years. But for them to give up that, for them to even consider letting go of this thing which is so much part of their lives, gives shape to their lives, gives them community, gives them a society that they're a part of, makes them, well, I am a Mormon, or whatever. Before they can even do that, they have to be able to see that what they are going to receive, what they're going to hold on to now, isn't like that, hasn't got the failings that has, and is so much better. Right. And they're actually holding on to a